Hey, what is going on? It is your girl, Coach Ham, and welcome to the Coach Ham Chronicles. We will be talking about emotional agility versus emotional intelligence and what is the difference. We definitely have a couple of special guests and things we want to talk about. I have a brother from another, and he is from across the pond, so I cannot wait for you to meet him and kind of get into his head and where he's coming from when we talk about what is the difference between agility versus the intelligent type of leader. So let me go ahead and bring him on for a second. Hi.
Hey, Coach Ham.
How are you? What's going on?
I'm good. I'm across the pond, as you correctly said. It's pretty late here, so I'm just kind of like burning the midnight oil. But yeah, looking forward to seeing where we go with this conversation. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be on here. I'm a big fan, and
Nice.
You've been on my radar for a while now, and it's just cool to be part of this. Cool to be part of this conversation.
I'm super excited too. And it just so happens for our listeners who are trying to figure out like how the heck did they meet? We ended up meeting via Instagram and then email. Basically what ended up happening is that Tom had put on his like Google Alerts emotional intelligence, and some things just kind of popped up, and it was articles from a while ago on yours truly. But after that, we started building a friendship, and we realized that we have so much in common and that we really want to get into learning more about our perspectives and what that means for both of us as coaches and leaders. And we decided that tonight would be the night that we just showcase our talents to the world and just kind of have a conversation with you all. So, Tom, when we start talking about emotional intelligence and being able to manage our emotions, right, and our behaviors, that's the one thing that everyone knows. That's the very shallow, or what I like to call the superficial version of just the EI side. But when we're talking about the agility of being emotionally agile, this is when people start to manage their emotions, and then it allows them not to be controlled. So it's either you control it or they control you. So what's really the difference?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting like topic to explore, right? And it's given me like a healthy like mind disruption. It's made me think about this a bit differently and like my own approach as a coach, because I don't necessarily think that the emotional intelligence and emotional agility are like mutually exclusive. But when we look into the kind of the nuances of it and recognize that emotional agility is this newer concept, then we can start seeing how those differences play out a little bit. So when I think about this and I think about the great work that Susan David's done around emotional agility, I think it's arguably more about accepting your inner experience, right? It's about being able to think about how those emotions are playing out with you. And as you say, with emotional intelligence, it's more about thinking about how we're maybe going to be regulating those emotions, because we're thinking about how they kind of play out in our behaviors, where emotional agility is really kind of properly acknowledging those and seeing kind of like what data that's giving us about ourselves. But like I was saying, I'm thinking about like my own approach here as a coach and someone that really draws on the kind of emotional intelligence piece. I think there's crossover here, and I think it means that we can kind of draw on both of this to really kind of like explore with curiosity the value that this stuff can bring into so many different types of situations.
Okay, so before we kind of get into this nitty gritty meat and potatoes of this conversation, this dialogue, I want to really give our guests an intro to who Tom Zierold is. He is the founder of EQuip, which is a UK-based coaching company that works on individuals who have a keen and heightened sense of emotional intelligence, and not just to support their professional life, but also their personal development. So what he's also going to share with us tonight is going to be the concept of how to be emotionally agile. So Tom, once again, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Let's kind of get into the question and answer segment, if we will, right? So
sure thing. Let's do it.
All right. So question number one for you, sir. How do people change? And when we talk about changing, how are they showing up and showing out and walking in their why? And are they really ready to adapt to this status quo?
It's such a good question, right? And I think as soon as we think about change, it's so important for us to acknowledge, for a lot of people, like change is tough, right? And because change brings about uncertainty and sometimes some ambiguity as well. And our brains don't always sort of deal so well with that, right? There's like different reasons why we kind of get a little bit like, you know, comfortable in our comfort zone. So we need to start by recognizing there's something going on here, right? You know, so we actually have to kind of start by, as you said, showing up to those emotions, showing up to what actually is making us feel not so comfortable about the prospect of change. And I think, you know, what that means is that we are actually trying to explore what the emotion is we're experiencing a little bit here. And if you think about something like change and why it feels a bit scary, is it because there's a fear attached to it? And you can think, well, where's that fear coming from? And for a lot of people, it's probably like the fear of loss of control. It's the fear that somehow that something being different in the future is going to take something away that they have right now. So I think the showing up is acknowledging the fact that rather than try and wrestle with this and be like, oh no, I'm good with change, what's actually kind of derailing me here? What's actually going to be a problem unless I kind of show up to it and sort of think about that? So once we have to start with that, right? And then once we've done that, we can start stepping out because we've acknowledged there's a fear that we're dealing with here. But how rational is that fear, right? Because when you think about something like control, then the reality is in like our circle of control, what have we got in there? Like our behaviors and our responses. There's not a whole deal else, right? And change isn't shrinking or expanding that. So actually, it's not really having this impact the way we're seeing it. So we can start realizing that how rational is this fear, and is this fear and belief serving us, right?
Yeah.
And I think once we've acknowledged that the fear is maybe ironically like controlling us, right? It's this fear that's controlling us. We can step back and say, hold on, I don't want this to kind of like define me. Like, I don't want this to kind of like stop me from seeing what an opportunity can be through having a change happen or through going through a change.
Right.
And that's the thing. Once we've kind of seen that and we've kind of stepped out, we can then start looking at the change for what it is rather than just being kind of caught up in the idea of change, if that makes sense. So you start looking at something as opposed to being like, change, it's all different. What am I going to lose here? It's like, okay, so what's the change that's going to happen? And what's the opportunity that comes with this change, right?
And that's a good thing. So we start talking about how are we identifying change, right? How do we appropriately, or how do we start labeling it to figure out, is it really change? Is it fear? Is it just this uncertainty and uncomfortableness of just who we are, to really start branching out and saying, you know what the showing up and what stepping out for us looks like is being able to tackle it head on, to say, you know what, I'm ready to shift. I'm ready to pivot, whether that is in your professional life, your personal life, wherever you are at this current state, that some point there has to be a metamorphosis that comes with it. You have to go through a cocooning process. And we all know that in order to become that butterfly, it takes time and you have to wrap yourself up and it gets comfortable and it gets tight. And then all of a sudden you have to break out of that comfort zone. So you're absolutely right. Everything you're saying, I'm in 110% agreement of saying, you know what are we doing here? How are we starting to identify these changes so we're not mediocre? Everyone is so big on being different and they're idolizing this because this is a trendy thing to say, I'm everything and nothing all at the same time. So it was like, okay, if you're all of this, but at the end of the day and at the core of who you are, why are you still just kind of sitting in this one place, or you're at this one stage that you just haven't gotten to the next or the next? So what would you tell your clients, especially who those are kind of in that transition period right now, that they're not really sure that they want to leave their current state, but they're also slightly fearful of moving to the next?
It's another great question, and like the way you articulate that, I'm fully on board with it. In terms of how you describe what that feels like, that feels like at a tangible level for people. And yeah, for sure, with clients, there's often this kind of purgatory where someone's they're starting to accept the change is happening. There's an inevitability about it, but they're not quite sure what their role is in that change, or how it's going to be beneficial to them. And that doesn't have to be like a selfish thing. It just means that how do they buy into what's going on, right? And I think this is really where, when I'm working with clients, this is where we start talking about values, and we talk about walking your why, right? Which is like, in my mind as well, the bit that sings out maybe the most to me when it comes to emotional agility, this idea that values aren't these like intangible, fluffy things that kind of like good on a boardroom wall, but actually, they don't actually mean so much to us day to day.
Oh, like a hanging cats.
There you go, right? There you go.
Yeah.
We can see that everyone can pitch them right now, the ones, and we think that these are kind of universal things, and they're nice to have. And the thing is, values aren't something that we need to judge. It's not like we have to put our moral compass there and say that this value is better, but we have to recognize that we're made up of a unique blend of values. And I think when we think about values, what we're actually thinking about is like motivational values, the things that drive us, that energize us, that give us our sense of purpose, right? And we'll all have these values. So in order to actually make that change sticky, to kind of like make it something that we get on board with, we have to hook it around the values that are driving us. We have to see how that change is going to present opportunities for us to express those values properly. And this, values can be, there's so many labels, right, you can have when it comes to values. You can find a list, you can pick your top 5, and that's great, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper to try and work out what those values actually are. You have to look in terms of like your past, your present, and think, well, what are the kind of like the beacons that are going to make me feel that sense of what I'd call like self-regard, the kind of that the satisfaction you get when you're showing up as yourself and you're expressing yourself the way that you want to be and the way that feels right for you to be.
Right.
And the thing is, I mean, there's so many like tools out there, like be it profiling tools or psychometric tests, which can kind of unpack those values for you. But there's also stuff you can do like on your own for free. Honestly, sure. So, so there's a couple of ideas. So this could be, let's see, it'd be great to get your opinion on this. And I need to give some kudos out to the author, Emily Golden. She's just released this new book, sits in the emotion intelligence kind of scope, and it's called The New Golden Rule. And anyway, one of the exercises that's in this new book is called 50 accomplishments, right?
Okay.
So I did this 50 accomplishments, and honestly, Coach Ham, I started off and I'm like, maybe I'm the typical like self-deprecating like English guy. I was like, I can't even think of 5. You know what I mean? It's like,
right, let alone 50.
And if I think of 10, am I like a narcissist? Like, what's going on here?
Right.
So I'm kind of thinking like, okay, what's good? Like, you start going through like, I passed my driving test. That was pretty good. I got my first job, got engaged to like an amazing woman. Like that's 3. And then I'm like, okay, what's going on here? But if you persevere at that, what starts happening is you start realizing there's these little bits and pieces of daily life that actually mean something to you when you stop and reflect on them.
Yeah.
And the key thing here isn't necessarily about listing 50 for your ego. Okay, maybe it will make you feel a little bit of like gratitude for your achievements. But the more interesting thing is the more you list, the more you can see a pattern, because you start realizing that if it's an accomplishment, it means something to you, right?
Yes.
So what is the link between these things that mean something to me? There's got to be something there. And when I was doing it, so I live in the house I'm in right now. We so fortunate we bought it a few years ago, but we had to kind of fix it from the floorboards up. So I've been kind of renovating this whole house as a kind of continual endeavor. Okay. And I was sitting out in the garden when I was doing this this little exercise, and I was looking at the garden shed, and I built that garden shed with my dad. And the reason why that's an accomplishment to me was because I was spending time with my dad doing that. So it tells me that one of my core values is around feeling good when others feel good, feeling good when I can share an experience. Now, someone else might be looking at that shed and being like, do you know what was so good about building that shed is like, I got it done. Like it had to be done. It went up. I got it done super quick, cost effective. Great. Or maybe they're looking and being like, you know, I built that shed perfectly. Like I got the right timber, measured it out. It's level. It doesn't wobble. It's technically perfect. So these things are all fine. They're all perfectly like, you know, acceptable. It's just they're showcasing a different value. So we can have the same activity. 3 people can be doing the same thing for a different value. Right. So it's a bit of a long story there, but it's like when you do something like this, you start getting a little bit of, you become more cognizant of what those values are, because you see there's something that glues them together. There's something that shines out. And when you kind of know what that is, and whether it's about feeling good when others feel good, or whether it's about just achieving goals, getting stuff done, or whether it's about expanding your understanding, you go back to the idea of change and you think about, okay, so in this change, how am I going to be able to express those values? Am I going to be able to see how this change can benefit others, give them a voice, let them be heard, build some psychological safety? Or is this change going to provide challenges for us to overcome and the sense of achievement that will come with that? So you can start kind of building that value into your change mindset. So
I love it. So I think one thing that you really hit home on is you have not just values, but you have core values. And I think one of the biggest things that, as you're telling this shed story, is that not only did you complete a task, right? That's great. But you also was able to spend time with your father. Like, this is time that you can't get back because, of course, we're all on this earth with borrowed time. So being able to even say that your dad is still living and he can actually build a shed with you, that alone is like an additional accomplishment, because you guys are building something with your hands. You're taking stuff that literally is from the ground up and you're making it into some type of fortress. And I think that is a beautiful analogy to say you've created something that is firm and it's solid. And that's the relationship that I can already tell that you and your father have, because you took this project on together. And it's funny that you even talked about psychological safety, right? That kind of falls right into our next part, is to really say is, how safe is it for us to express new or different ideas, especially in a workplace when sometimes that status quo is normally the opposite, right? Like, you don't want to take on new things. You don't want to be asked different tasks because it's that fear of, well, if I ask, then it doesn't look like I'm competent. But yet, if I'm confident enough to ask, then maybe it's reward. So it's that damned if you do, damned if you don't catch 22ism. So I just kind of want to get your insight on, you know, when it comes to being different and taking risk, you know, how safe is it for those to actually start to express and, you know, kind of create different and new ideas?
Yeah, it's such another good question. And I just wanted to, I wish I could catch that moment. I'm going to listen back to this, obviously, about how you described the relationship with me and my dad. Like, I'm going to present that to him and be like, wow, it's amazing, man. Thank you.
Yes,
but yeah, so with it, and I think the key thing about the question you're asking here is, and we need to start by looking at ourselves again here and put our thinking through that emotional agility kind of like framework. And it lets us shine a light on what I think is almost the crux of that question, which is about safety, which is about how do we feel safe? What is our relationship with that like, and what does that mean to us? Because when we're, again, showing up, we're acknowledging that there's a fear there. There's a fear that we're not sure it's safe for us to express this new idea, to put forward our belief, without maybe the fear of being judged, or even perhaps more acutely, the fear that maybe puts our job at risk, right? If we say something, maybe not today, but maybe it sows a seed and that we don't want to put there because, you know, we're having to put ourselves in the line. So we have to acknowledge, like, okay, how am I feeling about this? And then when we're stepping out, we're again saying to ourselves, well, is that belief like serving me? Right? Is that belief serving me into the person I am? And I think arguably when it comes to the judgment piece, there's a famous quote, and it's the one where it's like, people will judge you no matter what. And I remember when I first heard that, and I was a bit like, no, 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 no. I got some power over this. And then you start realizing, but we judge people all the time. It's kind of like an in and out process, and it's often about the other person. It's about their own defense mechanisms, the reason why they're finding judgment in us, right? So again, it's something where actually it can be quite liberating to realize that, okay, that's not going to infect my self-image. If someone chooses to judge, that's one thing. Obviously, when we've got the idea that it's about a risk to our job security, that can be legit scary, right? So then we have to ask ourselves this question: is, in this case, staying silent easier than the discomfort of feeling shot down if our opinion isn't met with merit? And that's a personal thing. We have to ask that question to ourselves. And one of the ways of trying to get a clear answer is to, I think it's called like temporal distancing. You have to put yourself in the future and say, okay, in 3 weeks' time, in 3 months' time, in 3 years' time, am I going to look back and regret not having had that conversation? How do I feel? What is this saying about me right now? And this is not something, again, this isn't about saying you do or you don't. It's about you having that internal conversation and deciding, again, as you're kind of stepping out and seeing it for what it is, it's like, where does this like matter to you? Where is the rubber hitting the road, where the stuff that's really kind of like, important to you? And again, that's when you start thinking, okay, so what are my values telling me here? Because you may be saying, do you know what? Like, it might be, hell, I'm going to bring my voice to the table here. It's like, the emotional win that comes out of being able to express how I feel about this and see that idea go somewhere. Because if I don't say it, it's staying right here, right? Then that's worth it. I can take that. I can do that because it outweighs the risk factor. So, you can listen to me, Mr. Non-agility corporate guy, right? You're going to listen to what I have to say. I've made that choice. And then the moving on, I think, is about embracing that mindset. And it's about saying, like, delivering your message with authenticity, with energy and purpose, because, you need to speak your truth here. You need to feel safe about doing that. Okay.
Yeah.
You need to be cognizant of the fact that, it is your choice, but it's like, the stuff that matters to you is going to be the thing that you're going to be thinking about maybe in a few weeks, in a few months, whatever. And I think, so that's, I think, emotional. So you always have to start with yourself here and think about, so what's on the line for me and how do I feel about that? But then I think where the kind of the emotional intelligence part maybe comes into the equation a bit here, and kind of the framework that I use, it's about thinking, okay, so how can we like create this conversation in a way which lands the way we want it to, but also acknowledges the fact that we have different values. People see things differently, right? People don't necessarily understand, not through ill intention, but because of lack of understanding. So how can we build out a better message? And I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well, because I've been doing some work recently about the area I call like having regard for others. Yeah. And this doesn't mean that, it means that you're trying to look for the positive intent in other people's actions. It doesn't mean that you're kind of saying that you accept toxic relationships or you accept being suppressed in your viewpoint. It's not that, but it's about saying that, okay, if I can accept that I've got my own unique set of values, then it makes sense that someone else is going to have their own unique set of values as well. So it's in my interest to know what those values are, so I can speak to them, so I can be clear about where I stand, but to see where this other person is. So I guess it's starting to, step forward with empathy as well.
So when we start talking about that self-regard, that is just a really fancy word saying like, this is your self-confidence. And this kind of goes back to that infamous golden rule, like do unto others as you want to be done unto you. So when you start thinking about how you're responding, how are you showing up, not just in the workplace, but in your everyday life, you really start to have to be really intentional about how you are viewing people and how you're interacting, because what ends up happening a lot of times for especially like our clients and how we talk with leaders is that you have to kind of think 2 or 3 steps ahead. not in terms of strategy to get something out of them, but also so you can figure out how do you pivot them in this company. If you want to create buy-in, if you want to start creating trust, you have to be able to see the vision and how are you placing the people that work for you in that vision, realizing that not everyone is coming to the table with different goals of promotions or titles or whatever that is, but saying, you know what, for those who really need to understand more of their own self-confidence, start making them slightly uncomfortable, just that you're giving them something new, something different, and you're coming with a different perspective, not because of manipulation. You're not coming because you are the boss. You're simply saying, you know what, I want you in a couple of years to literally not be here, not because I don't want you to be here, but because it's time for you to grow. It's time for you to start thinking outside of your comfort zone. In order to do that, sometimes it is a chess match and it's not always going to be a checkers game. But for those, I think you're right, starting from the empathetic side of the house and also the sympathetic, being able to understand where some people are. Not everyone is willing to take the risk. And when they are, that's great. You've kind of taken a leap of faith. You have really shown yourself, your true colors. You laid it out all on the table. So now what kind of boils down to is figuring out, well, now what? I've taken the risk. Am I waiting for the reaping of the reward, or do I now just kind of sit in this silo? Because that's also kind of the twofold sword of, well, you took the risk and then it's like eerily quiet. So what do you do then? I think I had an episode that we were talking about being authentic in the workplace and what that looks like for especially women of color. It's hard. And I think a lot of times it comes with just this facade of not necessarily being us or being comfortable to be as, as real as we want to be. And I think that's probably the best way I can say it, is that it's not always easy, because not that I'm just going against, white men. I'm also going against, white women and all these other minorities. And then you throw in everything else on top of the fact that this is also a new generation. Society is shifting and changing. On top of, we just got a freaking pandemic. So you're trying to do all of that to then say, well, here's the risk. What am I willing to do so I can speak up, so I can stand up, and also realize that my why, in order for it to start to be trajectory and moving forward, is going to require me to move in a direction. And even if that's bit by bit and slow and steady, it will take that type of risk for you to start moving.
Yeah. I'd say what the episode you mentioned there about authentic leadership, that was the one I think that kickstarted me listening to the Chronicles. And I was, and just to be transparent for a second here, right? Because, look, I'm like a white male in his 30s, south of England in the UK, come from a hardworking, but ultimately like a pretty comfortable middle-class background.
Right.
So I've experienced privilege, right? And probably a lack of cultural diversity. So for me, and in, just here having this conversation and like listening into you talking about code switching and cultural archetypes, it's like, this is stuff that can kind of make me reframe my thinking as well, and make me approach these kind of conversations that I have with my clients and just deepen that level of empathy. And again, just be prepared to kind of just listen and just to ask the questions, and not think that not choose silence over discomfort, right? Not because I want to say fear of saying the wrong thing. And I think and again, from what you were saying there, going back to when we're taking the risk of having these conversations, like maybe no matter who we are, I think there's always the sense where sometimes I talk about empathy and it can be confused as a sort of a kind of like a fluffy, like, I see your perspective and I agree with that. And it's like, as long as you're okay, I'm okay. We're not really saying that. We're saying that listening with empathy is giving someone a chance sometimes just to kind of really burn out their viewpoint, right? So if you imagine it, like, if you're prepared, because I think the tendency sometimes is we go in with an us versus them mentality. So we're already kind of primed to be triggered because we think they're going they're going to shoot this down, they're going to say no. So we're kind of ready to have the argument because we'll get some kind of like, you know, dopamine hit from feeling like we've been like,
right.
you
You're
know,
preparing
wrong
for
or something.
rejection.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
it's like, and you can, and of course, and
Right.
that's so understandable. And it's like thinking, well, how is that serving me? Is there something I can do different here? This isn't about kind of selling out. This is about what tactic, what strategy is gonna work here. And I've talked to people before about this when they feel like they're going to raise a topic or have a conversation. It's going to be met with either ambivalence or some hostility, and that can be an uncomfortable place to be, or it could be a fiery place to be.
Yeah.
And I think that the key always here is to kind of, you just keep listening and encouraging the other person to talk. Tell me more about that. You say, tell me more about that. I'm curious to know more about your concerns with this. And the temptation is to be like throwing counter arguments in, but that's just putting like logs on the fire, right? You need them to burn out that viewpoint, and you're listening and you're sense checking. You're being like, okay, this, and you're waiting with your response, because the more that they disclose, right? And they, you know, people feel good when they're talking, so they're giving that neurological buzz, they're burning that out, and then by the time they finish, you've probably got, if nothing else, an idea about what they feel the threat is, and that threat is going to be connected to one of their values, and once you've got that, you've actually got some data, and even if you don't want to respond in the moment, you can step away from it, reflect on that, and be like, okay, I know what kind of ballpark I'm in now. Like, I know I've got more information to understand about where I want to go next with this conversation. So,
no, that's good. I think you're able to label things appropriately, right? So one of the biggest, I think, archetypes that we talk about in our field of work is being able to say, hey, can you label this emotion appropriately? Is it actually what you think it is? Because sometimes from that physiological standpoint, you may want to label it as anger, but it may not even really be anger. It could be frustration, anxiety, but it also starts to show up in a physiological sense very differently. So being able to then realize that, you know, you have these triggers, and while your clients are talking about, well, this bothers them. Well, can you explain a little bit more about that? You know, where are you getting this from? You know, how is that showing up in your day-to-day life? You know, physiologically, does your hands get extremely sweaty? You know, do you have these butterflies in your stomach? You know, I have a course that literally teaches you on emotional hijacking of how do you identify it? You know, how do you contrast it? You know, how do you prevent it? Because I've been there before. I've had complete and total emotional hijackings or blackout moments in the workplace of me just completely cursing people out and then kind of snapping back into it. And I'm like, oh crap, I really just jacked up. And everyone now looks at you like you're the angry Black woman in the office. And because it's simply of not being able to properly identify what was happening and not even realizing that all this stuff that's in your body is telling you, you need to slow down, take a break, take a breather, look at what is going on and realize that this isn't good. So you need to step away. You need to look at the bigger picture so you can then have a action plan moving forward. But because everything goes so quickly, like it's easy to quarterback, right? Like you could talk about this after the play, but when you're right in it, that's when we're saying that you need to be a little bit more intentional. You know, you have to be at a place in your journey and in your life to say, you know what? I need to be able to pause for a second. Let me take a break. Let me take a breather. Let me just kind of get this out and then move on. So as we're even moving on into the next question, how consistently do we need to start demonstrating self-discipline? And of course, we kind of just started talking about it, but this is in order for us to see change through to completion.
Yeah. And it's, again, the work and what you're saying about emotional hijacking, I think, and the stuff you're doing with that, I think we can all relate to those experiences that you articulated so well. So I think when it comes to, you know, the consistency part of this, when we're trying to get change to go through, I think what tends to derail us from consistency if we kind of lose sight of those values that are kind of driving us there in the first place, that emotional win we're looking to get, if we don't have clarity on that. And again, it's any kind of like emotional upsets that or that we experience along the way. They can. Cause I think the thing about having the determination and self-discipline, it's like we need to see the kind of the incremental gains that our efforts are doing, right? So it's like one of the ways to think about this is, again, to kind of like picture like, okay, where is the kind of like, where are the goalposts here? Where are we aiming to get to? What's it going to feel like when we're there? So what's, again, driving me towards this change? But also remembering it's a process and it's a journey. I think sometimes we put everything future focused and we forget what's going on in the here and now. So that's about saying, like, it's about celebrating success. It's about allowing yourself to say, do you know what? Like, whether it's grabbing some FaceTime with someone, or whether it's sending that email out, whether it's, done in a safe way, you can meet up in the office or wherever with your team or your colleagues and say, hey, look, guys, thanks to these individual contributions and these collective contributions, look where we've come. Look where we've come. Let's remember like why we're doing this, and let's appreciate this. Because then I think that really gets us to, that kind of stokes our ability to stay determined and to stay disciplined and persevere on that track. I think where there's always going to be roadblocks, though. There's always going to be challenges along the way. And I think, again, you talked about emotion hijacking, and, it makes me think about kind of like the whole self-management piece of emotion intelligence is what do we do when those things happen? What do we do when something suddenly throws us off course? Because, the emotional hijack, or like, I think the amygdala hijack is, I'm not a neuroscientist, but, I kind of like to try and kind of like educate myself a little bit on it, right?
Yeah.
And in those moments, and we've all probably experienced them, our brain, dives down into like a negative rabbit hole, right? And it starts catastrophizing situations, and that can be a pretty like intense place to be. It can feel like everything that we've worked so hard for is just kind of like disappearing, or it's kind of like going through our hands like sand. It's just kind of falling away.
Right.
And I think there's so many, and with your work as well, there's so many good techniques and tools that we can start embracing to help when we think a stress bomb's about to explode under us or something, right? This isn't about suppressing those emotions, but it's about acknowledging what those emotions are and thinking about empowering ourselves to think about what's the appropriate response for who we are and what we want to achieve. And from my perspective, and it's kind of like being part of my own personal discovery, is breathing. And it sounds so like it's the most simple thing. And if you'd asked me this a year ago, 18 months ago, I'd have been like, and I've nodded along, and I'd have been like, yeah, you carry on with your breathing. I'll just breathe like, normally, like a normal person. Right? This kind of like innocent naivety or whatever it was. But again, there's something that's so important about doing it. And again, because of the physiological part of it, right? Because when you've got that hijack happening, your limbic brain, it's all the fight and flight. It's just ready to kind of like take over and do something like in the moment, which is probably, you end up making a permanent decision on a temporary emotion. And in some situations, that's not such a good thing to do, right? It's not about saying like, oh no, I'm going to bash this emotion away. It's about naming that emotion. It's about calling that emotion out. And then as soon as you do that, your neocortex starts to kind of kick in, because it's like, okay, I can see what's going on here for what it is, rather than the kind of the stormy clouds kind of like gathering around my head. And breathing, because obviously it's just helping you do that, right? It's helping you kind of like bring in that the neocortex, get it firing. And I don't know if it's I can share like a quirky idea about this.
Please.
If you like. Sure.
Yes.
So, and again, there's a thought leadership consultant, Michelle Bahari. So I'm stealing it from her. I'm kind of like, I'm showcasing on her behalf, even though she doesn't know. So when I talk to clients about this, and I'm kind of like, so I'm quite into like meditation, into like guided breathing. So I'm kind of on board with these techniques and the benefits they give me in my daily life. But, I know some people it's not their bag. It's not say in England, their cup of tea or whatever, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And especially if they're saying, well, hey, what if I'm in the middle of like, you know, I don't know, it's about to have a stressful phone call, or it's like, you know, stuff's gone down and I'm kind of like, you know, I can't go off for 10 minutes and, you know, do some meditation, right? With the best will in the world. So this idea is, and it's always interesting I always try and share it with people that I know have kids as well. Because you know, you get those bottles of bubbles, right, that you can blow. So I tell people, like, have a bottle of bubbles on your desk. And I can see they look at me and they're a bit like, I really have no idea where this is going. I'm like, just bear with me, right? Because you've probably already got some, right? If you've got kids as well, you know, who doesn't love playing with bubbles in the garden?
Right.
When you start feeling that hijack or that stress build up, this works especially well in the kind of like the Zoom world we're in right at the moment, right? Because you can kind of hide them on the desk. Is if you take those out and you practice blowing the perfect bubble or the perfect 3 or 4 big bubbles.
Yeah.
The process of doing that is controlling your breathing. You're taking a deep inhale and like quite a big exhale. And that is basically activating, I think it's the parasympathetic nervous system. It's calming you down without you even realizing it. So you're just blowing these bubbles. So it's taking you like, what, 10, 20 seconds or whatever. Put them back on your desk and, you know, and you're away.
That's awesome.
It's a little life hack. And again, I've stolen it, but I'm determined to tell everyone about it because I think it's like,
I think I'll be bringing bubbles to my dinner table, to my job, to my office. I'll pretty much have them with me at all times, even with a toddler that's ripping and running and just going completely crazy. But I figure before we kind of get into the last question, can you please tell our guests where can they find you? Where can they learn more about who you are, what you do, and everything that you represent?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I guess the best way to find me is for people who are on Instagram and LinkedIn. They're the kind of the channels that I would use. So you can search my name, Tom Zierold. I think there's only one of me on LinkedIn, so you should find me. Okay. You can kind of check out the work I'm doing. I share a lot of content and some of the blogs and kind of like toolkit reports that I put out around emotional intelligence on there. And then, I'm at EQuip _CT, at EQuip _CT. Sorry, my social media kind of technical knowledge isn't great, but you can see me there. And like for anyone that follows you, Coach Ham, then probably see that I'm like one of your keen fans as well. So they can check out the stuff there, and then the website and everything is linked to that. And it's check it out.
Okay. and there you have it. I know that I definitely will be checking it out. I know we will take a quick second break because we do have a sponsor that wants to talk about their amazingness, and then we will be right back. All right, and we are back because I love doing this stuff. So we're on our final question for the night. So after just blowing bubbles, and now I really am just definitely going to be looking for all the bubbles in my son's room tomorrow. How are we as aspiring leaders and even current leaders able to just manage our own physical and emotional needs, especially when you're not necessarily getting all the support from your colleagues and your current leaders? So what can you tell your clients what they should be able to do and how they can start moving forward towards a healthier life?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question. And the first thing that comes to my mind is like drawing on our self-awareness, which I think is the thread that just runs through emotional intelligence. And you know, it's like the building blocks, right, of having an emotionally intelligent approach. Sorry.
It's awesome. We're live.
I love it. We're live, right?
Yeah.
That was great. That was great self-management, Coach Ham. That's brilliant. Just dealt with it, straight back into the conversation, didn't drop a beat. Amazing. For my mind, with self-awareness, it's really the ability for us to take like our emotional temperature at any time and to almost be able to take a helicopter view of ourselves to see how our behaviors are playing out. And so there's some really good tools out there that can help us when it comes, we've talked about this a bit, about labeling emotions, because such an important part is being able to recognize an emotion and get as granular as we can on that. And there's something called the mood meter, which is like Mark Brackett runs, which is an app which I can share some details with you. And there's a behavior scientist, Paul Erkman, and the Dalai Lama have created this atlas of emotions, again, which allows you to kind of almost pinpoint what you're feeling and just sort of sense check what that could be telling you. Because I guess what you're doing is you're labeling that emotion to kind of figure out where it's coming from. And again, just that process is the first thing for us to be able to check and say, okay, how are we feeling right now? Am I kind of like, what time of day is it? What's going on right now? Let me just pause and not just try and plow through it. And then like suddenly have to like pick up the pieces later when something seems to have gone pretty wrong or something like that. And I always, in fact, with my partner and her work with the Samaritans when she was younger, I always encourage people to do the if you've heard of it, the HALT acronym, HALT, HALT. So you halt, right? You stop, and the H basically stands for hunger. So you say to yourself, am I hungry right now? Is my blood sugar a bit low? Is that why I'm feeling a little bit like
edgy?
Not great. Yeah. A, am I angry right now? Is something like pissed me off and I haven't resolved it? Is it there, but I haven't actually placed some attention on it? L, am I lonely? Have I actually had any compassionate conversations today? Am I kind of missing a bit of that interaction? Or T, like, am I tired? Did I stay up too late last night? Do I actually just need to like accept that I need to sleep for at least probably another hour every night for the next week? Because that gives us this kind of like segue from like our physiological sensations into kind of like how they're playing out in emotions. The other part of the question, and I think this is so important to shine on, is we're talking about here getting support from others as well, right? Yes. And sometimes we'll be in environments where we can't always easily perhaps get that from our leader or our boss or our colleagues. Maybe we can, or maybe we can draw upon other people in our lives, right? And the thing about getting support is that one of the beautiful things about it is it helps us get a fresh perspective as well. And it helps us actually increase our self-awareness. And I think this is a kind of maybe a bit of a tangent here, but to me, what I try and do a lot, and I do this with friends, with family, is I ask for feedback. Because by asking for feedback, I'm straight away creating trust. I'm asking someone to give their opinion of me. And we all know that feedback can be an uncomfortable thing, right? Both for the person asking for it and giving it. But the more we do it, the more we get into the habit of that, the more we reap the benefit of being able to kind of see ourselves for who we are and kind of get a clear idea about, okay, what's working for us and what isn't. And people are, if people are actually sharing with us that stuff with us, that's a real gift, and we should appreciate that.
Right.
And I think the thing always is about like feedback. It sounds scary. It sounds like some kind of like critical, constructive kind of thing, or someone's going to be overly nice, and it doesn't mean anything. Right. But there's an awesome way that we can do it. So the last idea I can share with you, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
It's called the keep, start, stop method. So basically, when you're asking someone for feedback, you ask them, what should I keep doing? And this is really good because it means that you're already asking them to put a spotlight on your behavioral strengths, the stuff that you're good at, the stuff that kind of probably drives your values. It's the stuff that is intuitive, comes out, and it kind of defines who you are and like what your abilities are. What you should start doing is quite interesting, because it's saying, actually, you'd be really good at doing this, but I'm not seeing it from you. It's like, where's that self-confidence? I saw it before. I'm not seeing it right now. It's like, and then you think, okay, well, what's going on here? There must be something. What's the blocker there? Or it could be that one of your strengths, right, Could be that you're like this super helpful person and you're always there whenever someone needs you. But sometimes you kind of overdo that a little bit and you end up trying a bit too hard and people feel a bit like, hey, just give me some breathing space, right? Just for sure, right? So it lets you think about those overdone strengths. And then, and also and the stop part as well, it's about saying, okay, what's the thing here that I just need to kind of self-manage a little bit? What's the thing here that is actually not quite landing? And the thing is, because you're using this sort of keep, start, stop method, is you're giving this kind of ability for someone not to have to kind of figure it out themselves what the feedback needs to look like. You're giving them this sort of framework and a guideline to look at. And yeah, I think it's something I've only come across quite recently. A Dutch author called Gilbert Elginkamboon. If he hears this, he'll know that pronunciation is incorrect. But he's a super cool dude. I've had the privilege to have a few conversations with him, and he does a lot of work for emotional intelligence for people that are analytical thinkers. So it's super interesting. And this feedback idea, I think the more we get comfortable asking for feedback, the more we actually can feel supported, and the more we can build trust with people. We can have candid conversations.
That's so good. So for us to recap before we end our evening, we want to start showing up. This is how we're facing our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors. And we're doing that with an open mind. We're able to start stepping out of our comfort zone. This is where we're starting to put those harsh, negative, critical thoughts to the side. We're able to say, you know what, emotions, you know what, thoughts, I'm trying to figure out a way to start reacting more appropriately in any given situation, where we're also going to use Tom's infamous HALT method, being able to figure out like, hey, why am I walking in my why? Being able to have this willpower, this resilience, this agility to really understand exactly what is my focus? Why am I here? Does that align with my purpose, my goals, and will it remain on track? And that's when we start talking about those SMART goals. And that's a whole nother episode for us. And then finally, being able to move on. It's okay to realize that some things are just temporary, but here's some ideas to start finding that there's balance, being able to be competent and also being able to challenge those same type of ideas by making small, deliberate changes. That includes your habits, your mindset, and just also your motivation. What's going to put you to the next level? What's going to get you there is by doing just these 4 very small changes on a daily basis. So, Tom, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I know it's probably 1, 2 a.m. in the morning there. So thank you so much for just your agility and your flexibility of coming on this show tonight. If there is one thing you want to leave our guests, what would you want to leave them with?
I just firstly to thank you, because this has been an absolute treat, and just so nice to have this conversation. And if I was to leave people with one thing, I'd say that emotional intelligence, it's a continual endeavor, right? It's not something where it's not a tick box exercise. We don't suddenly get our stamp in our book and say that we've completed it. We have to be motivated to use it and strengthen it. And I firmly believe it's something that we can strengthen. I firmly believe it's something that can make a difference in different areas of our life. We just need to have that appetite to be curious about it a little bit.
Well, you've had it, folks. You have heard it from the best. Until next time, we will talk to you all. Have a great evening and a good morning. Have a good day.